Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. Hollywood, Hollywood, Hollywood. Once upon a time, that name evoked images of glamour and high-quality entertainment for most. But nowadays, it tends to evoke something entirely different. Images of socio-politically driven agendas that may include the emasculation of men, gender-swapping characters, race-swapping characters, beloved franchises being retconned, deconstructed, and destroyed, and of course, the perpetual onslaught of masculinized strong woman characters being inserted into every conceivable narrative. Does that sound about right to you, ladies and gentlemen? How do those two very different perceptions come across? I think that it's fairly safe to say that today's modern perception of Hollywood is a lot more negative than what it used to be. But when people express their negative perceptions about Hollywood due to the kinds of entertainment that it tends to produce and celebrate today, Hollywood will typically retaliate by lashing out and attacking anyone who dares to criticize their socio-politically driven agendas, which have become far more important to Hollywood than any good faith effort on its part to produce what audiences would actually like to see. And part of what underlies this entire situation is what the Hollywood elite have created for themselves. Self-made echo chambers where they mutually reinforce each other's preferred socio-political points of view that have increasingly shifted further and further towards the far left as compared to everyone else, which includes the vast majority of potential moviegoers whose movie theater ticket purchases form the financial basis of what sustains Hollywood's entire industry. In other words, without the paying audience, there would be no Hollywood. This is what forms the basis of the very accurate tagline, "Go woke, go broke." So having said all of that, it's genuinely not surprising that the once widely watched annual Academy Awards, to which the Hollywood elite make their annual pilgrimage, has instead seen a steady ongoing decline in viewership. And is Hollywood making any effort to reverse the declining viewership trend, or is it more interested in continuing to dig its heels deeper into its socio-political messaging? But before proceeding, if you're enjoying this video, please consider pressing the like button, and if you'd like to see more of my content, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel. And I want to convey my deepest thanks and appreciation to everyone who has subscribed. Over the past decade, fewer and fewer people have wanted to tune in to watch Hollywood's single most important annual event, the Academy Awards, which used to garner a television viewership that was between 30 million to 50 million viewers. But for the past 4 years, viewership has consistently been below 20 million viewers. Part of the reason for that is Hollywood's obsession with DEI and continually pushing the woke identity politics message. And it hasn't helped when Oscar recipients use their moment at the podium to espouse their personal political views in what's quite often a very self-righteous manner. Then, of course, there are the annual plethora of Oscar-bait movies that are typically financial flops that most people have probably never heard of, and are typically released in December when most people are busy with the holidays. But today, not all Oscar-bait movies are actually shown in domestic movie theaters. Some are only streamed online, which includes this year's most nominated movie that's entitled Emilia Perez. And it's very likely that most people had probably never even heard of Emilia Perez before it received one of the highest number of Oscar nominations in the history of the Academy Awards because it's Oscar bait. A total of 13 nominations, which includes 4 Best Picture. But how does Emilia Perez compare with the other Best Picture nominees in terms of critical and audience scores? The 10 nominees for Best Picture this year include the following: A Complete Unknown, Anora, Conclave, Dune Part 2, Emilia Perez, I'm Still Here, Nickel Boys, The Brutalist, The Substance, and Wicked. And here's a chart that I created showing their respective current tomato meter and popcorn meter scores on Rotten Tomatoes. As they used to say on the children's TV show Sesame Street, one of these things isn't like the others, and it's rather obvious. Of the 10 Best Picture nominees, Emilia Perez has both the lowest tomato meter critic score, and it has an incredibly low popcorn meter audience score of only 19%, which sticks out like a very large sore thumb. Switching to this next chart, which focuses on the tomato meter critic scores, only 2 of the 10 nominees have scores that are more than 1 standard deviation below the overall average for the 10 Best Picture nominees, A Complete Unknown and Emilia Perez. And when we look at this third chart, which focuses on the popcorn meter audience scores, 9 of the 10 movies have audience scores that are within 1 standard deviation of their overall average score of 81%. But the audience score for Emilia Perez, which is nothing more than a woke Oscar-bait vanity piece movie, is around 2.5 standard deviations below the average. Would any of you watching this video believe that a movie that has such a rotten audience score, that is completely out of touch with the other 9 Best Picture nominees, as well as mediocre critical reviews, is deserving of a Best Picture nomination plus 12 other Oscar nominations? In my own personal opinion, I would have to say no. So why did Emilia Perez receive 13 Oscar nominations? Because as I had talked about during this video's introduction, the Hollywood elite are far more interested in pushing their DEI and woke identity politics socio-political agenda than being true to their own art form. The moment that the Academy Awards made woke identity politics checkboxes a mandatory requirement for Best Picture nominees, it set the stage for activist producers to come up with Oscar-bait movies whose sole purpose is to push that agenda. And that, ladies and gentlemen who are watching this video, is in all likelihood the sole reason why the movie Emilia Perez was produced in the first place. And if my suspicions are correct, then the reasons behind why every other nominee in those same 13 categories were nominated become equally suspect. In other words, the Hollywood elite and the Academy Awards have essentially trashed their own credibility in order to reward a mediocre Oscar-bait film due solely to its socio-political messaging. And that is the sole purpose of Emilia Perez, which not only checks off multiple Oscar mandatory intersectional woke identity politics checkboxes, the movie is essentially nothing more than an overdose of messaging set to poorly composed music. Because the movie is essentially a transified and francophonified musical wannabe Mexican telenovela about a fictional Mexican drug lord who decides to become a trans woman and hires an attorney to help him find a sex change specialist doctor to make that happen. Does that sound like an appealing plot to you? Is that something that you would actually want to pay money to watch? Having seen a number of clips from the Emilia Perez movie that included samples of its music and singing, I wouldn't and I haven't. So since part of my description of Emilia Perez refers to it as being a wannabe Mexican telenovela, was the movie actually filmed in Mexico? No, it was filmed in France. Did it at least have a Mexican director? No, the movie was directed by the French director Jacques Audiard, who also co-wrote the movie with Thomas Bidegain, who is also French, as well as Léa Mysius, who is also French. And we can't leave out this juicy tidbit. Emilia Perez is based on a book written by Boris Razon, who was born in France. So a story that's supposed to take place in Mexico about a fictional Mexican drug lord was written as a novel by a French author, then it was turned into a movie directed by a French director and has 3 French-born screenwriters. If you're writing a story about Mexico, wouldn't it be a good idea to actually involve someone from Mexico who can lend the story some credibility? Apparently not, folks. At least not in France and not the Academy Awards either, which places so much weight on woke identity politics, part of which requires nationality authenticity. The Academy has apparently completely turned a blind eye to the fact that the entire narrative and production of Emilia Perez is inauthentic due to it being a story written in France by a French author and a movie that was produced, written, directed, and filmed in France. So, what about casting? Are there any Mexican actors in Emilia Perez? Let's take a look at the 6 highest billed actors in the movie. The highest billed actor, Zoe Saldana, who plays the attorney, was born in New Jersey, which is part of the United States and is nowhere near the Mexican border. The second highest billed actor of this Oscar-bait disaster is the trans actor Karla Sofía Gascón, who plays the trans drug lord and was born in Spain, which has an entirely different dialect of Spanish called Castilian and sounds nothing like the Spanish that's spoken in Mexico. And culturally, Spain is not Mexico. The two countries are vastly different from one another. But, moving on, the third highest billed actor is Selena Gomez, who was born in Texas, which is also part of the United States, but it at least borders Mexico. The fourth highest billed actor is Adriana Paz, and she was actually born in Mexico. So there is at least one actor from Mexico in this movie about Mexico that was produced, written, directed, and filmed in France, and based on a story that was originally written in France by a French author. The fifth highest billed actor, Edgar Ramirez, is from Venezuela, which again is not Mexico and isn't the same as Mexico. And the sixth highest billed actor is Mark Ivaner, who was born in Los Angeles, California, which is in the United States, but isn't far from the Mexican border. So to recap, the movie entitled Emilia Perez, which is a transified and francophonified musical wannabe Mexican telenovela about a fictional Mexican drug lord who decides to become a trans woman and hires an attorney to help him find a sex-change doctor, includes a cast comprised of 1 Mexican actor, 3 actors from the United States, 1 trans actor from Spain, and 1 actor from Venezuela in the 6th highest billed roles. And it was produced, written, directed, and filmed in France, and is based on a story that was originally written in France by a French author. And how does Mexico feel about this movie? According to this January 23, 2025 article from the website France 24 entitled Emilia Perez Lauded in Hollywood but Criticized in Mexico, despite its alleged international success, including 13 Oscar nominations, where the transgender musical about violence and very bad activities has been accused of trivializing. The article reports that in a petition that was begun on change.org, it describes the movie as being an insensitive film that is disrespectful to Mexican culture that goes far beyond the very bad activities and the pain that thousands have experienced. Mexican cinematographer Rodrigo Prieto, who has worked on Barbie and Killers of the Flower Moon, describes the movie as being inauthentic and that the film's subject matter is a very sensitive subject in Mexico. But does Hollywood actually care about that? Of course not. So by nominating the very insensitive and inauthentic movie Emilia Perez with 13 Oscar nominations, Hollywood has arguably admitted that it doesn't actually give a damn about Mexico, because nominating the movie due to it having a trans actor and a trans plotline was far more important to the Hollywood elite. So again, what does this say about Hollywood's credibility and its self-proclaimed sensitivity? The film's French director, Audiard, has rejected criticism that the film misrepresented Mexico, but acknowledged in an interview with the AFP that he perhaps, quote, handled it clumsily, unquote. He also admits that it's a, quote-unquote, mongrel film. Mexican writer Jorge Volpi called the production, quote, one of the crudest and most misleading films of the 21st century, unquote. In an article in the newspaper El Pai, Volpi argued it, quote, embodies all the clumsy prejudices against gender transitions, unquote, while still praising Gascon's meticulous work. Quote, Emilia Perez is everything that is bad in a film. Stereotypes, ignorance, lack of respect, making money from one of the most serious humanitarian crises in the world, unquote, Cecilia Gonzalez, a Mexican journalist living in Argentina, wrote on X. Again, where is Hollywood's credibility and self-proclaimed sensitivity in all of this? And how does the LGBTQ group GLAAD feel about the movie? Originally published on November 15th, 2024, but updated multiple times ever since, an article entitled Emilia Perez is not good trans representation pretty much sums up what the LGBTQ community thinks about this movie. Now that Emilia Perez is streaming on Netflix, more people are able to critique this profoundly retrograde portrayal of a trans woman. While the film garnered rave reviews when it premiered at Cannes in 2024, none of those reviews were written by trans people. In other words, more inauthenticity. While some reviews praise the performances in Emilia Perez or the film's production values, critics who are focused on the film's trans representation tell a very different story. These critics understand how inauthentic portrayals of trans people are offensive and even dangerous. So is this GLAAD article saying that Emilia Perez is offensive and dangerous? Let's find out. Emilia Perez is a step backward for trans representation. Then, after the Oscar nominations were announced, BJ Colangelo of Slash Film wrote, considering the legitimate criticisms that have been lobbied against the film regarding both its trans representation and its depiction of Mexican culture, it's wildly disappointing to realize just how many Academy voters are completely out of touch and clearly voting for the guise of performative progress of what Emilia Perez symbolizes, rather than let the communities represented in the film take the lead and determine whether or not this is a portrayal that deserves celebration. Amelia Hansford of Pink News wrote, Emilia Perez's screenplay is so cisgender it's almost satirical. In fact, it's the single biggest indicator of Audiard's gender identity. He might as well have the word cis tattooed on his forehead. What's immediately frustrating is that Emilia Perez exudes a kind of confidence that's almost nauseatingly sure of itself when it shouldn't be. It's a script that is so alienated from the process of transitioning as a trans woman, and yet blurts falsehoods out with such bold, intense conviction that you'd think Audiard himself had gone through 500 different gender-affirming surgeries in one sitting. Maddie Lucas of Transcendental Cinema wrote, Emilia Perez was met with rapturous reviews out of Cannes, its unusual musical style wowing audiences before being picked up by Netflix in the United States. Yet despite its popularity, it might be one of the most deeply misguided films about transness I've ever seen. Its protagonist's transition is seen as duplicitous and dishonest, an act of manipulation through which she continues her selfish attempts to control those she abandoned. Not only is her transition portrayed as more of a disguise to evade the authorities, it's an act of continued selfishness that ends up destroying not only her own life, but the lives of those she loves. So even though the LGBTQ community also rejects Emilia Perez and calls it inauthentic, just as Mexico views it to be an inauthentic representation of their country, that didn't stop the Hollywood elite from fawning all over it and nominating it for 13 Oscars. But now, in their excitement to make a political statement by overly nominating Emilia Perez, Netflix, the Academy Awards, and the Hollywood elite are now all suffering from buyer's remorse because, as it turns out, the trans star of the movie, Karla Sofía Gascón, had apparently been posting tons of racist posts on X. This, of course, has completely thrown the Oscars into disarray, and it's not the only controversy brewing within the movies nominated for Best Picture. So congratulations, Hollywood! Your stupidity is on full display for the entire world to see for itself. But what did each of you think about this video, about the Emilia Perez movie, and the controversy surrounding its 13 Oscar nominations? Please let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to each and every one of you who has subscribed to support this channel. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, and Blue Sky by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.